Hi, Drake. Thank you for having me at your apartment today to conduct this interview. How are you doing?
I'm good, Chris. Thank you for making time and welcome to my studio apartment and campaign HQ.
Yeah, this is pretty sweet. So, I was just going to ask you some questions about your campaign today, as well as things that you plan to do once in office. So, yeah, whenever you're ready, I'll start asking these questions.
Let's rock and roll.
Sounds good. So, for my first question for you is, why are you running for the Cook County Commissioner position? What do you hope to accomplish once elected?
I'm running because it's the right thing to do right now for me. For years, I've felt a calling to public service in Chicago, and I definitely saw it happening later down the line, but I looked at the need for better public servants now. Everything that was scary about the choice to run now still would have been scary in a decade or 15 years or whenever. So it was the right thing to go full send now. I mean, ready now, and we desperately need better public service now. Trump's reelection added a lot of urgency to my choice to run, and the Cook County Board touches some of the most urgently threatened areas of people's well-being. Cook County runs a huge public health care system. It serves 500,000 patients, and that's a system that's impacted by federal cuts. And patients who are getting kicked off of their coverage need alternative options. As well as Cook County has way better ways it could be protecting people from ICE. Cook County has contracts right now with vendors that are sharing data with parent companies, that are sharing data with LexisNexis, which of course supplies data to ICE. And some of those contracts were renewed just in the past year. That was really disappointing to see them be renewed without being even amended to protect people's data better.
Yeah, the administration's actions around ICE and how they're targeting blue cities is definitely a contention for many people, and something that seems to cross political lines. So, that's really inspiring to hear that you're making that a cornerstone of the fire behind your campaign. Moving on, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history in electoral politics? I know you're quite young compared to people that typically run for a commissioner position. What gives you confidence that you're more qualified than the incumbent for this position?
That's a great question. A bit about me. I am 27. I'm an industrial engineer. In my volunteer capacity, I've been a housing policy advocate for years. Part of my drive in public service is I was raised by two gay moms who left the rural South for a safe place to start a family. And there are a couple pieces about that I want to touch on in the path I cut through public service. One is Cook County is one of the only safe places for people to come in our whole region, right? We're bordered by states that are enacting regressive policies. So things are dire even among our immediate neighboring states. So Cook County needs to be a safe place people can come to seek refuge. And in order for that to happen, it has to be a place people can afford to come to live and have high quality services to rely on. My parents were lucky that they had graduate degrees, they were on a dual income, and that made their choice to relocate relatively easy. But I want Cook County to be somewhere people can come when they maybe don't have a college degree, maybe didn't finish high school, they're working an hourly job on a single income. They need to be able to come here to be safe too.
Yeah, so it seems like the civil rights aspect of stuff is very important to you, having an upbringing with LGBT parents. And yeah, I do know what you mean about Indiana, Wisconsin, even Missouri, enacting more regressive policies. I know that, for instance, probably not related to the commissioner position, but like with gun rights legislation, that's been a particular issue. There's been disagreement between our local states. Specifically, do you have a history in activism prior to running for office or anything related to electoral politics?
Yes, there's a few pieces of my background I want to highlight. One is my profession as an industrial engineer has been a lot of work with process design and process improvement. And I think there's a lot of important but unsexy work to be done in government to deliver services well, to make sure people's needs are being met, to coordinate care between different departments that provide services, to make sure it's not taking people a long time and their paperwork isn't getting lost in the system. I've spoken to people who have had a nightmare of a time enrolling in Medicaid in the state of Illinois. And that's something I want to have be as easy as possible. So I think that background's a really good skill set to use to look at government. And it's good to have a bigger variety of backgrounds among elected officials. We tend to see a lot of lawyers and lobbyists, which I don't think anybody's happy with. I want to see the ranks of government made up of social workers and nurses and teachers and technical experts like engineers and legal experts. And I think we need a lot more variety than what we have now.
Mm. Yeah, definitely having public servants in office and people that can relate to the common person, very, very important, especially for someone running for an office that is a progressive.
And And in terms of my advocacy, activism background, I've been organizing in some form for about a decade. Back in high school, I started out with a student led nonprofit that delivered menstrual hygiene products to shelters in the Portland, Oregon area where I grew up. It was illuminating to see the way that certain needs are stigmatized and thus not met. There's a lot of organizing around providing food, for example, for folks who are food insecure, housing insecure, and that's very important, as well as people's hygiene and medical needs. And because menstruation is something that is stigmatized, that's a type of hygiene product that tends to not be donated, and there tends to be a shortage in shelters.
Yeah, I see in your campaign page you talk very much about like abortion rights, and it seems like your work in activism is definitely a huge contributor to putting such importance on that. I'm glad to see that why you ran for office and the policies you want to enact is definitely tied to your experience in activism, and that's pretty cool to see.
I think so much is interconnected here, and this is a weird thing for a candidate to say, but my two moms conceived me through a sperm donor. So if it weren't for advances in reproductive health care and them being available to same-sex couples, I literally just wouldn't be here. And I think it's important to note that when regressive policies are coming for something that may not impact you directly, maybe it's abortion care this time, maybe it's something about IVF this time, it is a step on the path to attacking the rights and controlling the lives of so many more people. So you can't go giving an inch to regressiveness. You have to stamp it out wherever it crops its head up, basically.
No, definitely well said. And that's really cool that you have like your lived experience of these policies, like equal rights policies affecting literally your life. I think that's a really important thing to point out. And it's very interesting that you're not just somebody that's advocating for those. You yourself have a background of being affected by regressive policies, right?
One thing as well is I'm openly LGBT. I'm pansexual. I've been out since about 2020. And I would actually be the first LGBT county commissioner to ever represent District 10. I think considering the times we're in, it's important to have elected officials that understand the gravity and have a personal stake in the rights of marginalized people in the environment we're in.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak about your opponent and maybe why you're more qualified than them for this position?
Yes, I am challenging a 16-year incumbent who was appointed to the role back in 2009. My current congressman, Mike Quigley, was the county commissioner, won a special election to fill Rahm Emanuel's former seat, and my opponent was appointed by about a dozen Daily Era committee people. I've been very deliberate to be measured and professional in my critiques, but there are some issues that are important to bring to light for voters. One is my opponent is an executive at Aon, a commercial insurance company that does business with Cook County. And I won't mince words about the fact that I think that should be illegal to work at a company in a government affairs role that does business with Cook County.
Yeah, definitely a very blatant conflict of interest. If you're trying to make decisions that better the community, yet you're taking money from a special interest that makes money off of conflicts of interest like that, that kind of compromises your role as a leader of a community.
I would agree. I think it permanently compromises a commissioner's fiduciary duty to Cook County that's laid out in the ethics code. So in comparison, I am promising to serve full-time. I will hold 0 dual employment my entire tenure on the county board, however long that may be. And because of the huge scope of the work the county does, the healthcare system, the justice system, the property tax system, the many programs around economic development, it is a job that should be full-time. It pays $99,000 a year. That's a raise for me. That's a full-time salary in my book. And I think taxpayers should expect full-time public service for that. And in terms of qualifications, I'm bringing to the table a professional background in industrial engineering, a decade of organizing experience, spanning women's health care, environmental restoration, housing policy advocacy, and including taking hammer in hand organizing Habitat for Humanity builds through my former employer. As well as, I think it's important to have renters represented in office and transit users and young people in general. So I'm a renter. I've been a renter as long as I've been living on my own. I'm a transit user. I don't own a car.
You're a certified young person.
Certified young person, exactly. Certified Zoomer. And I think that that's really important representation to have. I have been really encouraged on the campaign trail by how many people who are in older demographics who are excited to see young people running. I've spoken with plenty of folks at their doors who are over 50, over 60, who bring up that it's nice to see young people running. So there seems to be a desire even outside our own generation for younger leaders.
Yeah, I think, well, looking at our last two, technically three presidents, both around the age of 80, both cognitively compromised, should I say? I think that's definitely burned a lot of people towards politics. So regardless of Republican or Democrat, we can at least get behind getting younger people into office. People that have the mental capacity to run is a good thing, right? Shocker.
And one thing that's important about having young candidates enter offices that some would call down ballot is that so often future candidates for the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, the governor's mansion, for even aldermen, are folks who got their start in lower levels of government. So if we want our Congress people to not be 80 in 30 years, we need to elect people to school board that are young now so that they won't be 80 when they potentially eventually are running for Congress.
Absolutely. Invest in the youth and you get experience and wisdom as the years goes on.
Absolutely.
Moving on, talking about finances a little bit. Can you go into a little detail about how you're funding your campaign?
Yeah, first of all, fundraising sucks so much.
Don't we know it? Yeah, most awkward need in history.
It's infuriating because it's something that should not be part of campaigns. Elections should be publicly funded. And if you'll permit a little tangent here.
Go ahead. We love tangents.
Is there are parts of campaigning, or rather there are parts of being a candidate that overlap well with parts of being a good public servant and being good in office. I think communication's a huge part of that, right? The way you communicate sincerely to people in your community is something that will serve you well on the campaign trail and is really important in office. Fundraising is irrelevant to public service. Being good at fundraising has no bearing on being a good public servant, and if anything, I think it cuts against you. So to that end, money does have to come from somewhere. I've undertaken a lot of personal costs to fund the campaign to a significant extent, as well as relied on individual contributions from folks who I'm involved with in housing advocacy, who are otherwise ideologically aligned. And I'm very selective about fundraising sources. So I have made a commitment not to take money from companies, not to take money from corporate-funded PACs, no money from lobbyists, no money from individuals who do business with Cook County or are employed by Cook County. Of course, no money from APAC or APAC adjacent shell PACs or anything like exactly. As well as no money from fossil fuel industry representatives. And I cannot in good conscience solicit donations from organizations like that.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I think that is one of the catch-22s about running for office is, unfortunately, we are in a developing oligarchy. It's really hard to compete against people that have 6-7 million in the backing of a political establishment. Kevin Ryan and I talked about this very extensively, but having the conviction to take the road less traveled has benefits that definitely extend beyond the campaign trail or even elected office of showing people running with integrity. I'm glad to hear that you do have some standards of what you select and accept for campaign contributions.
I think it's important. I think it makes the campaign uphill in some ways, or more uphill. It was always going to be uphill running against a 400 grand bank account on the other side of this race. But to me, the finish line isn't winning the primary or winning the general. It's doing a good job in office. And I think making unethical campaign finance choices would inevitably compromise my capacity for public service when in office. So taking the long view, I think this is the only way to do it. And I do want to make it a lot easier for the next round of progressive aspiring public servants. And that's why I'm pushing hard for public matching funds for county elections. And these would multiply small dollar donations from individuals made to candidates who have refused donations from companies and corporate PACs and organizational donations.
So you're really set on changing the election infrastructure too once in office. That's something that's very important to you.
That's a huge part of what I want to accomplish in office is leaving a much more wide open path for good public servants to enter office. I want to break down the written and unwritten rules that tend to disadvantage political outsiders, especially with incumbent challenges. That's something that can be kind of held at arm's length. I've been thrilled with how welcomed I've been by people, but the typical response to an incumbent challenger is to kind of be locked out. And like, incumbent or not, voters deserve a choice. It should not be taboo for an incumbent to have a challenge, because that is giving voters a choice.
Well said, well said. Bringing up Kevin Ryan again, he talks about how making campaign finance reform the center of his campaign is not just a single issue campaign, but an every issue campaign. And what he means by that is money touches literally every part that you want to accomplish. If you're taking compromised funds, if you want to actually adjust something that company touches, you're less likely to do so because you're beholden to those people who can then run a challenger against you. So I think you're right on the money. Helping even out the playing field so outsiders can come in, people that actually care, should be a priority, I think, for every person that runs for office in the United States.
Definitely. I mean, I think you don't see it happen because it makes people's own re-election harder, right?
Yeah.
You know, once somebody's in there, they start benefiting from the system they might have run on changing. And I think that's why accountability is really important. And I've encouraged my friends and like voters I talk to at the door to say, hey, keep an eye on me and hold me accountable. And if you feel like I'm not doing something I said I would do, I want to hear from you. Because I think there's a lot of pressure to get comfortable in the seat you're in, and I don't want to ever fall prey to that.
Yeah, no, well said. So my next question for you is, on your website, you prioritize strengthening and expanding county care services by providing alternative coverage options to patients projected to lose coverage, expanding the provider network, expanding enrollment support at Cook County facilities to increase enrollment of uninsured patients, and working with the Chicago Abortion Fund to maintain funding for abortion access to Cook County residents. Can you go more into detail on how you plan to implement these priorities if elected?
Cook County runs County Care, which is a Medicaid plan that you can enroll in if you've applied for Medicaid through the state of Illinois. And about 30,000 patients are expected to lose their coverage to federal cuts. That's going to cost lives if they don't get coverage through another mechanism. And Cook County was groundbreaking when it created County Care as a publicly run Medicaid managed care plan. There's no law that says Cook County can only make a Medicaid plan. So I think the logical next step, as ambitious as it is to create additional healthcare plans that can be accepted by Cook County healthcare providers and are available to people who are no longer Medicaid eligible. And they can be offered even at cost as more affordable than private insurance, because Cook County is not bound by all of the administrative legislation that private health insurance companies are, and it also doesn't suffer from profit incentive like private healthcare insurance companies have, which then necessitates a stricter regulatory environment to protect patients. This is, of course, very ambitious, but you need to do ambitious things to save lives. That's not something you can turn away from because it's going to be hard and you're going to face resistance, as complicated as healthcare can be.
Well said. Is there anything in particular to get that first step of making this dream achievable?
Yes. One great piece of news about this election is there aren't even people running from other parties, so it is largely decided by the primary, leaving 9 months before the general and then inauguration, and that's a 9-month head start to have to get legislation ready to file day one in office, and that's going to look like working with healthcare providers and healthcare unions and healthcare policymakers to draft the best possible legislation to get this done as fast as possible. In the meantime, because this will likely be time-consuming to achieve, I'm going to come to the table with ready-to-file legislation to broaden the provider network and enact financial reforms that pay providers on time because right now what I hear is a lot of providers won't join the county care network because of delays in accepting payment. So they want to provide care, they're willing to accept the Medicaid rates, but they do have to be paid on time. And that's an issue I want to resolve in short order, as well as making sure the provider list is updated in real time. Because I have friends and campaign volunteers that are on county care, and when they are looking for a provider, the list that county care provides is out of date. They wind up calling a provider that doesn't take county care anymore, or maybe just is closed altogether. It's especially a barrier to care when you consider that not everybody has great internet access, not everybody has great digital literacy. So working through the kinks of finding a different source that's updated is not going to be feasible for a lot of patients. So it is true equity of care to make sure the provider list is updated.
No, that's great. I think what you said about having legislation ready to file is super important. I want to follow up to that. How far in the process of having this legislation written out are you at this moment? Have you been figuring that out during this campaign? Is that something that is still in progress?
A lot of what I've done during the campaign is gauge who's interested in collaborating on efforts like that.
So you're making connections at this moment?
Definitely. And that's going to be really helpful as we get to the nuts and bolts of policy design over the coming year. Right now, because of just the reality of the campaigning, a lot of my work is focusing on talking to as many voters as possible so I can win this primary and enact those policies.
Right.
And trust me, I can't wait to get into policy. Like, policy is where I'm more comfortable, I would say. So I'm excited to get to policy if I am fortunate to be successful in this primary.
No, that's great. I'm glad that you're reaching out and making those connections now. And, obviously those things take time. This is just the primary, not the general election. Yeah, in the course of this year, I'm sure a lot of those things, will be more fleshed out. So moving on, your plan to address the cost of living crisis involves creating a revolving loan fund to provide self-sustaining funding for affordable housing. How is this different than the current practice the Cook County Board is pursuing in regard to affordable housing? And what would this look like in practice?
The really cool thing about a revolving loan fund is the self-sustaining financing of the construction of affordable housing. The way it would work is Cook County would make a one-time financial contribution to seed this revolving loan fund, and then it would be able to finance the construction of affordable housing projects, be repaid after the construction, plus interest, then have a little bit more funding to fund the next fleet of projects. So it's a really financially sustainable way of funding the long-term construction of affordable housing. And it can also be paired with community land trusts and other methods of land stewardship that return control over land use and housing to communities in a way that traditional affordable housing might not.
So how is that different than what the Cook County Board is currently doing?
Cook County currently lacks a revolving loan fund, and this would be taking a step the city of Chicago has already taken with their Green Social Housing Initiative. And this would be borrowing a lesson from that good policy design and applying it at the county level as well. And the nice thing about it being self-sustaining funding is it's not reliant on year-to-year approval of funding for grants and stuff like that. So it's a long-term guarantee of the county's ability to invest in affordable housing.
Okay, so yeah, it kind of is like a feedback loop that helps, like you said, self-sustain, helps the community develop these funds over time as well, and not just like a loan from the government. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. It's more financially sustainable, and that way the county's not having to, if there's a tough budget year, which we're seeing with COVID funds drying up, federal cuts.
Yeah, it was huge with the CTA, and thankfully we avoided that crisis.
Exactly, and the county's not out of the woods yet. So looking at the possibility of years where we might not fund all of the initiatives that we'd love to be able to fund, I want to make sure that affordable housing is secured for the long term.
Yeah, great. That's awesome to hear. So moving on, can you go into detail about other actions to lower the cost of living and how you arrived at these policy choices?
Yes. One policy on my website is to take Cook County sales tax and exempt personal hygiene items as well as childcare items.
Mm.
The reason for that is that sales tax tends to be pretty regressive. Folks who earn less money tend to pay a bigger percentage of their income in sales tax compared to folks that earn more money.
Mm.
And to help alleviate that, I want to exempt the childcare products and the personal hygiene products because those aren't optional, right? They're essentials. So people shouldn't be paying more money for diapers, for shampoo, basic daily essentials. And this is a way to, without hampering counties' revenue very much, reduce some of the regressivity in sales tax.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, if something's a need for a family, making that not the responsibility of the family could definitely help in making life more affordable in general. And you can see that, I think, in policies like in Minnesota where they have the free lunches, or I think they just passed that in free childcare in New York City.
Yes.
I think I saw Zoran did that his first week. That definitely will ease the burden for things that are out of your control as just a human being.
And I want to enact every county policy possible to make sure Cook County is an easy place to start a family and raise a family. So we're not pricing working class families out of Cook County, especially when this is somewhere people have to come to be safe.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, that's very important in these times. So my next question for you, which is kind of on a related note, is over the last several years, property taxes have been a common point of contention for homeowners, with Cook County having some of the highest rates in the country. On your website, you discuss lowering these costs by raising the assessment level of vacant land to cut tax breaks to speculative investors, and also by building more housing. Can you explain why both of these policies would help lower the property tax rate for homeowners?
Yes, and property tax reform could be its whole own interview.
Yeah.
But these policies...
Very complex.
So the assessment levels are set by the Cook County Board, and these are as close as we get to proactively setting a tax rate. So you get the assessment levels, and that basically provides a weight to how a tax burden is distributed to different property classes, like vacant land, like residential land, like commercial land. And this change in assessment from assessing vacant land at the 10% residential rate to the 25% commercial rate would shift burden off of residential land and residential bills and onto vacant land. And so one, that provides an immediate tax relief to residential tax bills. And it provides the most relief in areas that have seen the worst tax bill increases. So think South and West Side neighborhoods in areas that have a lot of vacant land. These are places that, based on some preliminary modeling I've had done, would save up to 15% on their tax bills. So it could be substantial for working class families. The other thing it does long term is it incentivizes folks who are holding on to vacant land and waiting for it to appreciate to either build housing on it, put it to some productive use, or to sell to somebody who will, including potentially a government entity.
I can actually speak on that a little bit. So my grandma used to own a restaurant called Stan's Drive-In. Maybe older people that lived in the Bridgeport area watching this maybe remember it. It had been around for at least 50 years by the time it was taken down in 2008. There was a couple businesses there, but since 2014 it had been vacant. Last year, or actually 2024, they tore it down, and I remember that happening. And since then, it's just been a vacant lot, and now it looks like nothing is going to be happening with that area. So, as somebody with a business in our family that I live really close by it. I drive past this every day. Seeing a vacant lot there where I knew there used to be a family-run business is pretty sad. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, of just how much vacant land just goes undeveloped when there's so many maybe hurdles that could be behind that. But I do know that with wealth accumulating to the 1% more and more year on year, and wealth inequality getting worse, that definitely is a huge reason where people are waiting for those assets to appreciate, and that can definitely halt development in areas that could very much use it.
Definitely, and land use policy is complex. There's a lot of red tape and barriers to build desirable spaces, like for small business, like for affordable housing. But one thing that does seriously need to change is the incentives around holding on to vacant land. That's bad for a city. Why in the third biggest city in the country do we have anybody just holding on to vacant land waiting for a payday?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Definitely agree.
And when it comes to building more housing, it's really that we're in this conundrum, right, of with our existing tax base, raising taxes will really strain working families and does risk displacing people. Cutting services is a non-option for me because services aren't good enough already. So the kind of secret third option there is if you build more housing and more space for small businesses, you can grow the tax base. You can have more parcels, more people that burden's distributed amongst. So you could actually get lower tax bills per person, but even more revenue potentially. And that is the main path forward to help us dig out of our pension hole and then be able to reinvest that money into better services.
So building more housing is great on paper. If you were to enact policies that would help build more housing, are there any safeguards that you would want to put into place to prevent people that have already accumulated wealth from picking up those properties? I know a big issue right now across the country is monopolies and corporations that are buying up housing developments to rent rather than individual homeowners or smaller landlords, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything in particular that you would do to safeguard against those corporations from getting these housing developments?
Definitely. I mean, there are a lot of different policies involved in making it easier to build housing. I definitely have a preference for local home builders and for developments that enable people to own homes. So to that end, what I'm proposing to use county-owned vacant land for is one, the construction of affordable housing, also the construction of housing that can then be involved in purchase assistance programs to promote home ownership, and also to help undo or repair some of the damage that was done to South and West Side neighborhoods by redlining, by the original FHA loan program only being available to white families, and also by land sale contracts, because that's not damage that just goes away because the policy's gone. It has to be undone. So what I want to see there is a pre-approved library of plans by Cook County, as well as proactive permitting for these developments. And what that'll do is lower the barrier of entry to local prospective aspiring home builders. Because right now, the environment around building anything is so complex that the only real players are huge developers that have more lawyers than a small builder has employees, because they're the only entities that can navigate the complexity of the policy environment.
Right. And you mentioned purchase assistance programs. I'm imagining those have regulations already that prevents bigger institutions from just buying up all those properties.
Yes, for purchase assistance, I would envision that being geography-based and likely means tested to a certain extent. So I want to make sure that for people who maybe grew up in a neighborhood or live in the neighborhood now and are renting and maybe rent burdened, so they're paying a huge percentage of their take-home income in rent, that they can access these programs and put down roots in their neighborhood and potentially, like with a 2-flat or a 3-flat, live intergenerationally or maybe be a owner-occupied rental. And I think that's a good model as we move toward ideally more social housing and more home ownership. Is, landlords are going to take better care of the building if they're in the building, right? A landlord's going to get on top of a roach problem if it's their home too.
Yeah.
So
you would hope so, unless it's a pretty gross landlord.
Right. So as we approach a long-term goal of just guaranteed social housing as a human right, I think that's a good step along the way.
No, that sounds great. Thank you for clarifying. As a follow-up to a previous question, the Johnson administration and other factions of Illinois politics have been butting heads constantly over whether or not to raise taxes to fund various progressive policies. How do you plan to advocate for your policies once elected to commit to lowering property taxes in a time where it is a struggle to prevent taxes from being raised?
So the way we get lower taxes in the short term responsibly is reform policies like what I mentioned with the vacant land assessment, where it's not a tax cut at all, but it's a more equitable distribution of how we levy the property taxes. Other more near-term solutions are things like consolidating some of the 2,000 taxing bodies we have in Cook County that all take a piece of the pie. Because that's way too many to be efficient or to be effective, right? Tell me why Navy Pier and McCormick Place have their own organization that levies a property tax. Mm-hmm. Tell me why that needs to be the case. And those people aren't elected, they're appointed. It's another step removed from accountability compared to having that budget overseen by elected officials, like city council, like the county board. Mm-hmm. So consolidation there. Additionally, what I want to see is a statewide ban, and this does have to come from the state level, on Board of Review commissioners. And the Board of Review is the people you appeal your tax assessments to. They need to be banned from accepting campaign donations from tax appeal lawyers. Because what we see, it's like the tale as old as time around property taxes, is commercial landowners, people who own like the Sears Tower, the Trump Hotel, buildings like that, have their team of lawyers do their tax appeals. And their team of lawyers are also the campaign donors for Board of Review commissioners, oftentimes. And that presents a severe conflict of interest that needs to be banned at the state level. And that'll, again, remove some of that inequity in the tax system, where powerful commercial building owners shift their tax burden onto homeowners and onto renters.
Follow-up question to that. You've outlined pretty well like the behind-the-scenes nature of raising or lowering taxes, right? And it's not just one person that affects that. So my question to you is, what are some plans of building these coalitions to enact these changes that you want to implement?
One thing I center in my campaign and that I want to center in my public service is that I'm not going to get anywhere alone, right? And even in the campaign, I'm sometimes fortunate to be the face of the campaign, and it's my name on the ballot. I'm in a couple news articles and stuff like that, but I would be nothing without the team of people that gathered around the campaign. It would be me and my rotation of 3 suit coats against the world. And that's going to be true in office too. I'm going to be dependent on a team and a network of people committed to getting things done. So I'm going to be really deliberate about building coalitions around issues that are simple to message on. I think messaging is really important, and I think great messaging around the vacant land issue would actually be the anecdote you shared about, it was your grandmother's drive-in, right?
Yeah, it's still on undeveloped land. It's been sitting there for about a year. No, doesn't look like any plans in sight to develop that area.
So you can look at that and go, tell me how that's the product of good policy. Something has to shift there. And everybody wants lower tax bills. So that's something where you could potentially get a rare alignment of homeowners and residents and renters potentially being aligned with the interests of some more commercial interests, because nobody wants to see land lying vacant and costing everybody else more on their property taxes. And same with things like healthcare expansions. I think you need to, the tip of the spear of the movement has to be something that looks really bad to say no to. So when I look at maybe expanding county healthcare facilities, I'm looking at efforts that would reduce things that everybody can get behind. Like, how do we reduce suburban maternal and infant mortality, right? With the expansion of health facilities and special health coverage, because that's really important. Nobody wants more dead parents, dead kids. And you look like a monster if you say no to that. So I think that's really helpful in moving some kind of sticks in the mud, is make sure that the storytelling is on your side there.
No, definitely. Well said. Well said. As a follow-up to that, are there any people that you've currently already built relationships with that you'd be excited to work with once in office?
Yeah, I think multiple of the older people who overlap with District 10, the district I'm running in, have enacted really good progressive policies around housing. Some of the alders, well, I mentioned I like the Green Social Housing Program.
Okay.
So some of the older people who worked on that were folks like Angela Clay, Lenny Mana-Hoppenworth, Andre Vasquez, Matt Martin. And to be clear, these are not people I have like a campaign relationship with, but from what I've looked at of their policy and accomplishments in office, I have respect for what they've enacted.
No, that's great. I was just going to ask you for a specific program that you've seen enacted that you really appreciate. So you called out, was the green housing policy?
The Green Social Housing Initiative is
Green Social Housing Initiative, okay.
And that's where the revolving loan fund is being created at the city level.
So that's an example of something that's already been implemented that you're basing your revolving loan policy on.
Yes, taking huge inspiration from the work done implementing that at the city level.
That's great. I was actually a question that popped in my head in regards to that question I asked you earlier was, in those loan policies, are you basing a lot of your policies off of anything that's already been enacted in other cities?
So I think it's important to take inspiration from where policies have been successful elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And even the vacant land assessment, this is getting nerdy, but there's an alternative to property tax called land value tax. And that's been implemented in some areas, like certain municipalities in Pennsylvania. And it can go a long way to alleviate what some would call blight, where you have these buildings in disrepair or just huge amounts of vacant land, and making sure that there's a cost to holding onto it and keeping it vacant helps shift the incentives enough that people wind up building in desirable ways on that land. So definitely taking inspiration from land use policy that's worked elsewhere. And one thing I want to acknowledge is the work before Cook County is so vast that no one commissioner is going to be an expert in all of the fields the county touches. So it's really important to me to solicit expertise on policy as well as input from people who are going to be responsible for implementing policy so that we design policy well on the front end. And shocker that the engineer thinks of policy as a design process, but I do in a collaborative design process. So I think it's important to get it right on the front end and make sure that policy doesn't just look good on the books, but it looks good on the ground when it's implemented. It's working the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, it seems like an example of where your previous work and life experiences really influence the decisions you want to make. And it's really good to hear that you're basing this off of actual policies that have been enacted in other places. Because I think when people hear about a lot of these progressive policies, the first question that they ask, this sounds too good to be true. Is there examples of this working in the real world? And the fact that there are means that, why couldn't we implement something like this here?
And I think it's really important to get your facts straight and the messaging simple on the front end, because goodness knows there are going to be bad faith, misleading attempts to oppose progressive legislation. So we on the progressive side have to come prepared with the real facts and a good message so it can't be
misconstrued.
Exactly. So we don't have folks trying to shut things down in a bad faith way.
Yeah, there's plenty of that these days. On your website, you discuss enacting evidence-based policies that reduce harm and prevent crime. Can you go into detail about some of these policies and how you wish to enact them upon election to office?
When people think about public safety, it seems like people forget the saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I would way rather prevent crime through methods like violence prevention than be reacting to it with a carceral system. So violence prevention programs, community-based violence prevention, have shown a lot of promise. One of the things I want to do at the county level is to fund them continually instead of year or 2-year based grant funds. So that way organizations can plan for the long term and we can pilot different programs and figure out what is working the best at preventing violent crime in the first place and promoting neighborhood prosperity and employment and making sure folks aren't falling into the cycle of reoffense and reincarceration in the first place. And it's no secret that for a lot of folks who wind up incarcerated, there's underlying substance use disorders, underlying unaddressed mental health disorders. And one thing that's non-negotiable for me is housing first solutions to mental health disorders and to substance use disorders. I've got loved ones who once struggled with substance use and have thankfully achieved sobriety, but they entered recovery when they were housed, when they were employed, when they had health care, right? And it was still the hardest thing they ever did. So I think it's cruel to expect people to achieve recovery when they're not housed, when they don't have stable income, when they don't have health care. So it's really important to fund those programs so that people aren't suffering the way they are now. And people basically, when you look at people who are being incarcerated for ultimately the root cause of mental health disorders or substance use disorders, they are being punished for experiencing suffering. So alleviating the underlying suffering is, I think, how we reach a way better outcomes in our justice system. One thing too I want to highlight is public safety and law enforcement are not synonymous. I think it's really important to remember our history, even locally, where it was the state's attorney of Cook County in 1969 who ordered the raid that assassinated Fred Hampton. It was county level government back then, in conjunction with the federal government, that collaborated to undermine the stability of Black communities and make them less safe. So it's, I think, really important to take that lens even today as we look at how are we construing law enforcement and public safety, and what options do we have that are more of a public health lens that support public safety so that we can reduce dependence on punishment and incarceration.
No, well said, well said. And the facts, I think, do bolster that prevention is better than reaction to crime, right? So I know in Chicago, we just had our lowest murder rate in, 60 years, since 1965. I saw last week, New York City, at the end of January, had their lowest crime rate as well, I think. I might be misquoting this, but in history, which blows my mind. And I know these are both cities that have adopted vast crime prevention strategies as opposed to just expanding funding to police networks. And when you really think about it, it does make sense. Like, if you're going to expect people to not become repeat offenders, they have to have their needs met. They have to have, stable housing, a job that they can earn consistent money, a purpose, an ability to have a second chance, not just be expected to fix struggling with an addiction, which is, an insane personal thing to overcome. If you're adding on top of that instability, how can you expect those people to overcome if they're not having their basic needs met, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's thinking that's missing so much when we think about public safety. And so much of what we do is punish people for having needs unmet. Like I talked about, punishing people for suffering mental health disorders, punishing people for being poor, punishing people for having grown up surrounded by violence. So then their response to trauma may be violent. And we take a punishment approach instead of a care approach.
Well said, well said. A couple quick questions about the position itself. So what does Cook County need to do to modernize its technology? I guess I'm asking in regards to both internal administration as well as for customer use. I know somebody that was talking about the payment portals and stuff can be a little not functional at times.
A lot of this is going to be the result of thorough analysis I do post-election. In terms of what I can speak to right now, Tyler Technology is a deal that went horribly sideways, and it's received a lot of complaint and been the cause of property tax bills being late. So we need better vendor selection for sure. And based on rubrics, based on basically references, because Tyler Technologies is a company that has received bad press elsewhere. It's been implemented. So we need better vendor selection that takes into account more than lowest bidder. There's a lot of opportunity to modernize and also unify technology with the city. The Cook County Board of Elections, for example, could be merged with the Chicago Board of Elections, right? So technology systems could be shared between city and county. Departments could be unified in a way that provides service better. One thing I want to see change with technology, and this benefits transparency too, is the way that county law is housed. You can go online and look at the county body of law, and it's basically laid out like an ebook. It's not that much better than flipping through a multi-volume series of county law books. So what I want to see done is basically, it might sound silly, but like how Wikipedia has links within a page to relevant information. So when the county laws are citing other county laws or referencing state law that mandates the creation of a county law, I want there to be clickable links, and you can hover on them and they provide a summary of the statute. So, that's not world changing, but it's going to make it that little bit easier to approach understanding where laws are and where laws are coming from.
Well, those things do make a difference when like somebody's trying to figure out just like, well, for instance, I'm a musician. I received a busking license. The process to find out how to do that was so stressful, not because it was hard, but because there were a lot of broken links that I had to click through. And I think we underestimate how much of those hurdles really prevent people from getting the information that they need or access to programs that already exist that you just don't know how to apply for.
Absolutely. It's unsexy, it's not revolutionary, but for quality of life, going through your systems and making sure the links work that you're expecting people to follow. I've definitely been hit with like a 404 page not found error because I've done some stuff with the city. I think it happened the other day when I was trying to see if my ballot got mailed by the Board of Elections. I think I got hit with a, you can't look at your voter profile. Anyway.
Seems like something the incumbent maybe didn't worry about fixing as much.
I think there's a lot of need. I don't want to, point fingers. I think there's a lot of need across all levels of government to just make sure stuff is working better. And I think that's where my background as an engineer is going to come in really handy.
Sure, yeah. Very, very respectable response. The Trump administration has cut funding to blue states such as Illinois numerous times over this last year. Most recently, at the beginning of this month, when the administration halted $1.5 billion in health and transportation funds. What actions would you take as commissioner to push back against these cuts to funding? What plans do you have to make Cook County more resilient to these funding cuts?
I think the last portion of the question is key, is how do we build resiliency? Because we cannot rely on the federal government for any of our needs to be met. I mean, the federal government is actively hostile to blue states and blue areas like Cook County in blue states. So building resiliency, a lot of that looks like fostering and nurturing local mutual aid style networks of support, making it easy for communities to meet each other's needs. I think at the government level, it looks at how do we be really smart about the way we fund services? So like the revolving loan fund, right? That is a more or less one-time expenditure. That's something that isn't going to have to be an annual budget item. So that's okay. We can get continual funding for something that's very important. And I think other policies too, looking at stuff that is basically free, like some of these technology improvements, looking at ways where governments can share resources like city-county collaboration so we can at least maintain services while our financial situations may become a little bit tougher. And policies like alternative healthcare plans offered by Cook County could even provide the opportunity to expand county healthcare facilities, construct facilities that could replace the closed Weiss Hospital in District 10, for example, just through the increased scale of these plans being offered at cost by Cook County. So that's not an additional expenditure by the county. It would be revenue neutral, but life-saving and good for healthcare access.
Okay, that makes sense. So it seems like you're focused on a lot of efficiency in addition to like creating new programs that maybe find or redistribute those revenue sources and take the burden off of like the working class. It seems like you're also focused on making things more efficient within government itself to cut down on like expenditures.
I guess efficiency became a dirty word with Doge. I was, as an engineer, it was
unfortunate.
It was awful watching what Doge did. There's a need, I would say effectiveness, really, because I'm not talking about any kind of cuts of any kind. I think, like I said, there's services already don't work well enough. There's not room to cut. But making good use of existing funds or standing up like the healthcare plans that are offered at cost and revenue neutral, right? So there's not an additional sales tax, property tax, what have you. It's sort of self-contained within the health enterprise fund, which today is already largely self-contained. I think that's a wise measure to take to expand healthcare access without taking on debt or something like that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a really sound way because unfortunately, at the end of the day, they do control the federal government and how our government is run. There's the supremacy of federal government over state government and then local government. And you're only limited by so much of what you can do. But within the levers that you can pull, there are strategies that you can definitely take. And it sounds like you're definitely thinking about that and how to be resilient.
And I do believe in using the whole power of the office too. So there's what's in my job description as a hopefully future county commissioner, and I want to do great at that job. But I want to use the full power of the office to put pressure on my colleagues in the city and the state to make good choices, but as well as use my platform to make sure that the Democratic Party produces a good nominee for president in 2028 so that we can take back the White House and not just wind back where the party it was in pre-2016, right? But return the Democratic Party to serving the working class. So I don't want to support the nomination of a Democratic presidential candidate unless they're campaigning on universal health care, universal family paid leave, campaign finance reform, some of the really fundamental, universally popular among the American people ideas that are necessary for better quality of life.
No, well said. Well said. That makes a lot of sense. Right now, DHS has been in the news for building massive detention centers at warehouses across the country, raising concern to Americans about the detention of U.S. citizens and groups the Trump administration declares enemies of the state. What can the Cook County Board do to provide transparency on whether ICE is obtaining property with intent to build detention centers?
That's something I'll keep an eye on and be the first to sound the alarm on. I'm also proposing the end of contracts with vendors who share data with ICE, the expansion of remote availability of county services so folks can remain in the safety of home while receiving services, and demanding that the state's attorney prosecute ICE agents.
Okay, that's great to know. I know that like the Philadelphia district attorney, for example, has made it a priority that they are going to be prosecuting ICE agents that break the law, and they will hunt them down, as he says, like they did with the Nazis after World War II. So that's good that you're taking that approach as well.
We need that here too.
As a follow-up question, is it possible for the Cook County Board to pass safeguards to prevent DHS from obtaining property here?
I'll have to look at what exactly Cook County can do to prevent it. Cook County is in a weird position as a government entity where it has very little ability to supersede local or municipal ordinances. What I'll have to do is look at what exactly Cook County's authority is to supersede the purchase of land by an entity like DHS. What I'll be sure to do is look at deeds and assessor data to make sure that it's flagged if and when it does happen.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Like just taking note of what steps DHS is actually doing and keeping track of that so you can make a competent response to that as the years go on.
And it's going to be a collaboration between state and city and county to make sure things are coordinated, to make sure the response is coordinated with understanding the data in the news if and when it does happen.
One more follow-up question. Are there current contracts that you're aware of that DHS has with Illinois law enforcement or other agencies in Illinois that you would keep an eye on or like to reform?
I'm not aware of specific contracts directly between DHS and any level of Illinois government. The concern I have is when there are vendors that contract with a level of Illinois government, and the vendors have parent companies that they share data with, who then share data with ICE, as we've seen in Cook County's Jail Victim Notification Network. So that's a contract I want to see ended, or at least amended, so that Cook County has rock solid control over the data and it's not flowing down to parent companies and then ICE.
Right, that's very big security concern. Another one I know that's really popular across the country that's been getting a lot of attention has been the company Flock, has been making a lot of deals with local law enforcement and small municipalities to create license plate readers that have been sharing data with ICE, that have been easily hackable, and have been pointed at places that are not traffic centers. Like journalists like Ben Jordan have exposed of one such Flock camera being pointed at a playground. Would that be something that you'd be looking into in Cook County as well once you get elected?
Yes, that's going to be another intergovernmental collaboration. I think right now we're seeing the downside of having let cybersecurity fly under the radar for a long time, because we're seeing how we're not prepared for surveillance technology to be used against people. And we're seeing that happen. So I want to make sure we curb those contracts, shut down cameras if needed, and make sure we have rock solid control over the data and the cybersecurity for those cameras, as well as networks like Ring cameras. We're seeing a lot of different technology potentially being used to create a network to surveil residents by DHS, by other federal entities.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you take that very seriously. That's something that's been particularly concerning to myself. I'm glad that more public officials are starting to take that seriously and people running for office. Is there anything that you would like to share about your campaign that you would like to pitch to the audience?
Well, I would love for anybody watching to get involved. There's 5 weeks left to the election as the day we're filming this.
What day is that?
March 17th, primary. Vote then or by then. I got my ballot yesterday. My fate's in the hands of tens of thousands of voters right now, so I'm super chill about that. But I would love everybody's help sealing the deal. So come out to knock doors with me, even if it's to hand out literature to voters during voting. That could be a big help.
Yeah.
And an election like this could be won on a handful of votes per precinct. So just one extra volunteer per shift could be the margin of victory right there. So the impact one extra person could make could be victory right there.
Right. And I'll say to that to the audience watching, local government offices like Cook County Commissioner are things that move the needle behind the scenes. And right now, it doesn't appear your opponent is really campaigning very much at all. So if you want to get involved, this could be an easy way to help fight back against fascism and help bolster your local community and, improve it for years to come. So elect Drake Warren, Cook County Commissioner, District 10. Help him with his campaign, door knocking, canvassing. He's your guy.
I'll see you on the campaign trail.
Yeah. All right,
Thanks
Drake,
so much.
Thank you for this interview.
Time, Chris.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm glad we were able to talk about policy, answer a lot of the questions that I think viewers have, and wondering about what a Cook County Commissioner even is.
Now we all know.
Yeah, now we all know. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.